Hello, and welcome to Lab 11. For this lab, we're going to go through the brain and we're going to go through all the different cranial nerves. And we'll talk about their functions of those cranial nerves as we go through these. So if we start with the brain, if you remember the bones of the skull, the lobes of the brain underneath match. So that frontal bone has that frontal lobe. The parietal bone has that parietal lobe. The temporal bone has that temporal lobe, and that occipital lobe is underneath that occipital bone. Now, here's where things get a little different. Underneath this occipital lobe, we have the cerebellum. That cerebellum sits below what is known as the cerebrum. The cerebrum is this entire portion of the brain. So it's going to sit below that cerebrum, and it's also going to sit posterior to this brainstem here. The parts of the brainstem that we can see here is the pons and the medulla. I've got some other views of it that'll show them a lot better. I try to pick the pictures that look the best when I pick pictures to go through these specific areas. So let's keep looking here. Okay. We've sliced the brain in half. This is our half head model looking from the inside. We have the thalamus. The thalamus is technically broken up into 3 sections. This area through here is that main thalamus. This area down through here is that hypothalamus. Hypo means below. So it's below the thalamus. And then we have epithalamus in this area. Epi means above. This one's kind of behind, but it sits above. So this is that thalamus. This big white portion here is that corpus callosum. In this thalamus, go back up here, we have this pineal gland. This pineal gland is this, if I use the right pen, sorry, this gland right back here. This is the gland that secretes out melatonin that's able to help you to fall asleep at night. So we secrete out more when we're trying to fall asleep. We secrete out less during the day. We have this gland, another gland, the pineal gland. This one is the pituitary gland. This pituitary gland works with the endocrine system, and it secretes out all kinds of different hormones. You'll learn those in anatomy too when you get to the endocrine system. It's usually one of the first ones covered. Not always, but most of the time it is. That is this specific gland. Again, up here, that is just that cerebrum. Back here, that is that cerebellum. Now we can go into that brainstem that I showed on the previous picture up here. Let's look at it down here. We can see better what we're looking at. This right through here, that is technically the pons. Below the pons, through here, medulla or medulla oblongata. Same thing, just two different names because this pons can technically kind of go back into here. If I draw it out better, and then up in here. This is the midbrain. That's also technically part of that brain stem. We just don't necessarily see it very well when you're looking at the brain from this position. You see it better from this position. We've got this area right through in here that's kind of this purplish tissue. This purplish tissue here is this choroid plexus. This is the area that secretes out, it makes that cerebral spinal fluid that travels around throughout, around the brain, around the spinal cord. From here, we can also see this little duct that travels through here. I'm trying to make it green enough. There we go. This is the cerebral aqueduct. So that cerebral aqueduct fits through here. Then we have one more, this area back here. It's considered that fourth ventricle. Here's another, this is the ventricle systems. This shows that cerebral aqueduct and that fourth ventricle that is part of this ventricular system. What this is openings in the brain, again, where that cerebral spinal fluid is being created. It's circulating around through inside of the brain. It travels up around the outside of the brain. So we're going to have lateral ventricles. So these lateral ventricles here, there's one on this side. And there's one kind of outlined out on the other side over here. You don't need to be able to distinguish right from left. You just need to know that those are the lateral ventricles. This third ventricle comes down in the middle between these two lateral ventricles. And then you could see from here this fourth ventricle that I drew out up here. This fourth ventricle found right in front of that cerebellum behind that brainstem. That cerebral aqueduct is, you can see part of it here. We'll flip this on the next slide where you can see it in more detail. So here, so you see those two lateral ventricles again. That third ventricle that came down in the middle. So that third ventricle is kind of through here. Here you can see that cerebral aqueduct much better. So this is the area that comes down through here. And then that fourth ventricle down at the bottom. On this model, this pink that's found here, the pink that is found there, that pink is going to be that choroid plexus as well. Here we can see that brainstem, and it also includes that thalamus in that brainstem. You can see that pineal gland back here at the back. We have our medulla, this area through here, these peduncles make up that pons. So if we flip this around the other way, Here is our pituitary gland. Again, you can see that thalamus. You can see the pons better from this view. Those pyramids are found within that medulla or medulla oblongata. So here, if we look at it from the side, see that medulla oblongata, that pons. You see that hypothalamus down in here. The bottom of that hypothalamus, you see that pituitary gland. You have that epithalamus towards the back, that thalamus up at the top. So now we've got a brain here. We kind of took out part of a lobe so we can see what's happening inside. So here you see that frontal lobe still. You see that occipital lobe, temporal lobe. You see that corpus callosum. This picture is also nice because it shows you don't need to know it for the lab practical, but it does help with things later on with special senses too, where that insula happens to be located. Okay, let's go into some of these optic cranial nerves. Okay, this olfactory bulb is part of that cranial nerve 1, which is that olfactory nerve. That is cranial nerve 1. That is this area that comes out on each side. The next nerve, the optic nerve. The optic nerve here is our cranial nerve 2. So it's going to be part of this through here, around. This is the cross where some of those neurons are going to cross sides to help process information. Let's try to see if I could find where cranial nerve 3 is. Cranial nerve 3 kind of sits down along here. Cranial nerve 3, that oculomotor nerve. This is the cranial nerve that helps your eyes move around. It also carries some autonomic functions to it. Cranial nerve 4 comes out in this area. That one is going to be trochlear nerve, cranial nerve 4. This is another nerve that goes to your eyes to help your eyes move. Help your eyes move around so you can look at different structures or anything. Cranial nerve 5 is that trigeminal nerve. Trigeminal nerve here, it's a pretty large nerve that comes out in this area. Cranial nerve 6, they did actually include it on the other side. Abducens. Abducens jumps into the middle here. New color. So here's our cranial nerve 6, abducens. It also helps to move your eye. Cranial nerve 7 come out through here. You kind of have it here, 7. And then 8 is technically right below it. They kind of put them together in this picture. So facial nerve is cranial nerve 7. That's the nerve of facial expression. It lets you make faces. It does have some parasympathetic because it's going to help with that lacrimal gland in your eye to produce tears, but it's mainly motor. Then we have vestibulocochlear, which is cranial nerve 8. That allows for hearing, that equilibrium, that balance. Cranial nerve 9, that glossopharyngeal. It's right there. Cranial nerve 10, vagus. It's here, glossopharyngeal. Goes to your tongue, allows you to move your tongue. Vagus does a lot of parasympathetic information to your chest and abdomen. It also does taste in the back of your throat. Cranial nerve 11 is this entire area here, which is accessory nerve. This one actually goes to your neck. So it's going to go to that sternocleidomastoid and part of that trapezius to help your neck move. And then our last one, cranial nerve 12 comes out from right there. Cranial nerve 12. And that is hypoglossal. That is another nerve that's going to help move your tongue. They're all labeled here. Here's another view. Some of them you can see much better on this view, actually. So you see that optic nerve. Here I'm going to add in that olfactory. So you've got 1, 2, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, then 10 in here. Then this whole thing is 11, and then 12 in here. So here's a drawing out of the brain. You see that cerebrum at the top. That's this entire area through here is that cerebrum. You see that thalamus, that hypothalamus, epithalamus, which has that pineal gland in it, that pituitary gland, which is actually attached to that hypothalamus. We can see that midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata, the cerebellum. And then below the medulla is where we start the spinal cord. This is what exits that foramen magnum in the skull and travels all the way down that spinal cord. Here, again, we're labeling out some of the different nerves. Here's where we get a good picture of those mammillary bodies. Those mammillary bodies kind of sit up in here. They are on your sheet. I was trying to see. You can somewhat see those mammillary bodies right here. They're not very well visible, though, on these models, at least not in these images of these models. But it goes through and it labels everything out again that you need. So now let's look at, this goes through the different lobes. We have that frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, that cerebellum. Let's go through some of these fissures. So we have the central cerebral sulcus. This central cerebral sulcus here is going to give us the separation between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. In front of this central cerebral sulcus is where we have our precentral gyrus. This is motor information. Behind the central cerebral sulcus is where we have our postcentral gyrus. This postcentral gyrus is where sensory information is coming into the brain. We can see the lateral cerebral sulcus. There as well between that temporal lobe and that frontal lobe. Here kind of draws out that primary motor cortex, that primary somatosensory cortex, which is that postcentral gyrus, that precentral gyrus. You can see them in those different colors, that central sulcus. You can see some of the different areas kind of highlighted in the brain. The longitudinal fissure, that's what I was trying to find a picture of. That longitudinal fissure is what splits that brain into left and right sides. You can see it from the top too. This is just the only picture I have of it that shows anything. Like it in here, you can kind of see it in this model going along here. It's where you'd separate that right and left side out. That's that longitudinal fissure. So that should include, the meninges. I knew I was forgetting something. Okay, a few things. Back to my drawing that has all kinds of stuff labeled on it. So our meninges. Our dura mater is going to be out here. Here, I'll come back and label that. Our arachnoid matter is going to be through here. Then our pia matter is the one that is directly on top of the brain. So that is where we would find that pia matter. So under that dura, we have this space in here. That is that subdural space. And then we technically have between this purple and this green going through here, that is that subarachnoid space. And I was just trying to make sure there wasn't anything else that I was missing that we can see on any of these pictures. In the superior sagittal sinus, there is not a good picture of that. A sinus, it would actually be this blue up along here. It would have continued up further in that superior sagittal sinus. What that is, is an area where blood kind of pools and collects. That's what a sinus is before it drains out of the skull. So that is where we would find that one. So if you have any questions about any of this information, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening.